Iran fires at Israel in response to Lebanon attacks. Netanyahu struck Iran without Trump's green light. Iran downed a US Apache and the US struck back. This is The Deep Dive. Welcome back to The Deep Dive. I'm Shifra Jacobs, filling in for Jacob Laznik, and it has been quite an eventful week. We have seen Israeli attacks on Beirut, Iranian attacks on Israel, Israeli attacks on Iran, and Iranian attacks on the US and US attacks on Iran. So we are kind of in a very convoluted situation when we're supposed to be in the middle of a ceasefire with a nuclear deal supposedly being days away from being agreed upon. With that being said, Israel's own military chief says almost any deal would be a bad one. So we're kind of in a precarious situation here where, once again, we have more questions than we have answers. It might sound a little complicated, so we are going to kind of break down what's been happening over the past week and how we got to the situation that we're in now. And here to break it down for us is our senior breaking news desk manager, Shir Perets. Thank you for joining me, and I am so happy that we are on the podcast together. This is our first time.
Absolutely. You're always behind
next
the
to each
camera.
other. I know. It's so much fun. What a week to start. We have so much to discuss. It's been quite crazy. I feel like I'm kind of coming from the point of kind of like our listeners because I wasn't at work for a couple of weeks.
You've been on sick leave.
I've been on sick leave. I did get hit by a scooter, but I am back. And I've obviously been following the news, but it's not the same when you're not like in the office. So I feel like you're also here to kind of like get me up to date, which is good.
There's something about being in a newsroom when Donald Trump tweets or truths that he has decided to strike Iran for funsies again. Not for funsies. It started when Iran downed a US Apache helicopter over the Strait of Hormuz, which they still deny that they actually had any involvement with that. But a helicopter was downed, and Trump decided that he needed to strike Iran. And taking a page out of Israel's book, he posted it on social media first.
You know, it's so crazy because I think at the beginning of the week, because if we go back even, that was like the end of the whole like saga of this week. If we go back, obviously Israel attacked Beirut. Iran were like, this is unacceptable, we're going to retaliate. And then we kind of saw it kind of bubble up and erupt kind of quickly. Like I wasn't expecting it on that day. I know that like since the war began, we've kind of been like, okay, maybe it'll be this week, maybe it'll be next week.
Someone
was
had
so
their
sudden.
hand on the trigger.
Something happened there.
Somebody, and it was very much not to give credit, but they made a point and they stuck to it. They said it's unacceptable for the IDF to be targeting Lebanon, so they targeted their missiles around where the IDF would be stationed in Lebanon, which is unfortunately primarily the north, which has already been like consistently bombed from Hezbollah the whole time. They never actually got a ceasefire. So they did aim everything towards the north, and then they sent one or two for like central, southern, just to sort of remind everyone that they still can. But they were very much localizing it.
The Houthis also joined in for one of them.
For about 5 minutes,
yeah.
The Houthis were like a real player in the game again.
That is kind of their move. I feel like that's how they act.
It's just kind of like a feature on a song, but then it's only backing vocals.
That's a great analogy. It's interesting also because we kind of saw the tension between, and I really want to go into this more, but like Trump and Bibi, they have like a very interesting relationship and
very toxic.
It's interesting also to see how like, what would you expect? Let's say if it was the other way around and it's sort of like the US, which literally we saw play out afterwards. The US is attacked by Iran. They are going to say, okay, we are going to retaliate, and this is now like an act that we have to take. When it was Israel, Trump says to Bibi, hey, don't do this. And Bibi's kind of like, I'm going to kind of defy you, and I'm going to do it anyway. And that was weird.
Not a thing that Bibi normally does.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen planes supposedly turn around mid-flight on their way to Beirut because Trump has said, like, turn the jets around. You're not going to do this. We have to work together. Unless, of course, it's his bases that are attacked, his helicopter that's down, and then it's, I'm actually going to do whatever I want and you're all going to take it. And then after I've had my fill, no, if you do anything more, you're overreacting, But their toxic love story, did you hear about the phone calls?
I've heard about some of the phone calls, but go into it a little bit. I mean, I've seen like snippets from them.
Some of the reports we've heard on the shouting matches that have occurred between these two world leaders, Trump Trump, first of all, took credit for Bibi not being in prison, which is...
It's what everybody was thinking.
Yes, but it was kind of a big one to say it out loud like that. To say, if it weren't for me, you'd be in jail right now. It's very, that's a big moment of, like, I guess putting someone in their place, but what is their place, really? There was, of course, Trump openly admitted in an interview with the New York Post that he did call Netanyahu, I won't say the exact wording, but let's say...
What does it rhyme with?
Ducking crazy,
Yeah, I think it's interesting also because it kind of shows the level of, like, what is a political show and what isn't. And I think, again, it's like what we kind of already know, but it's weird, like, within the same year to see Trump be like, Bibi is the greatest, he needs to be praised, he is the only one who can be this leader, and also he is a crazy person and he's not in jail because I am acting this way.
And just in the past 48 hours, Trump even hinted that Netanyahu maybe, I guess from the power of suggestion, from the way he said it, was maybe Netanyahu doesn't even want to run in the next elections, to which the Likud party immediately stood up and said,
yes, he does.
He will be running in the next elections. It's getting, with that plus his talk of you'd be in prison if it wasn't for me, him telling Herzog to pardon him, it's a little close to that election interference I hear so much about,
What do you think, like, just from, like, I guess, looking at it in, like, a broader picture, what do you think, just, like, from, like, I guess it's hard to know because it's Trump, but, like, what do you think he's trying to do?
I don't know if he knows. I think it's giving, when you play both sides, so you always come out on top. There's, on the one hand, you've got... you'd be in prison if it weren't for me, and you're crazy. And on the other hand, he is the best leader. We're wartime leaders, and we're the only ones who can do this. You should, you should pardon him. You should make him king, all that fun stuff.
It feels unstable.
It really does. And it also, it could be anything from unstable to just not being sure. Look, we know, working in the news, we know better than most that the situation changes from day to day. So... you wake up in the morning and you really have no idea who's going to strike who's going to be on whose side, who's
you can
running
think you do as
who.
well, and it's completely different.
So I guess it makes sense. Look, a recent CNN article, and this is absolutely real, tallied that Trump gave conflicting statements on the Iran ceasefire in this whole war since February 37 different times.
That feels so realistic.
It
just
is
based on our work.
Yes, it's they probably did not find everything. I'm sure there was more, but he says conflicting things. And while it is funny to laugh at, the situation does change from day to day. We don't know if things, there's always. How many times has Trump said in 2 more weeks, or we're coming up on a 60-day ceasefire, things like that.
Or the war is over.
Yeah,
or
and
total
we actually
victory.
won. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because I do the J-Post Daily Headlines podcast, and a lot of times, obviously, when Trump says something that is pretty monumental, which happens really frequently because he also, posts himself. So it's we can take directly from the source. Sometimes it is completely different within 1 week. And it's interesting because we work in the news, people will then come and say, okay, what do you know? And it's interesting because it's like, hey, I know what you know, maybe a little bit more, but it's different every single day.
In the span of an 8-hour shift, I have written conflicting statements from the president or the prime minister in the span of the same day. Or sometimes we'll write something in the morning and then by evening he's tweeted something completely different. But I also, if I were so compelled to put every one of my thoughts on the internet, it would probably look something like that too.
It's just interesting that we're at the stage, and we've been at this stage I think since 2016, but that is how world leaders express themselves. And I do wonder what this kind of means for public perception in Israel and also worldwide of what is happening in this war. Because if people are trying to look at something for stability, they're not going to get it. They're not going to get concrete. No, they're not going to get concrete answers. It's even beyond social media, I think, where it's even just statements, press releases, all these kinds of things that are more on the official channels.
Mm-hmm.
it is confusing. We still don't know, like we as in like Israel, we still don't necessarily know as the public what is actually going on.
Yeah, can you confidently say that on any of our fronts that we are decisively in a ceasefire with just one of them right now?
Like technically, but like what does that mean?
Do you know with all of your heart that in the next
that the fire
hour,
has ceased?
that in the next hour there won't be a siren here?
No, and it's
No
a crazy
idea.
reality. I think from what I, even just like speaking to friends and things like that, it's like I know that people are trying now to just be like, I'm going to take it day by day. Every single day, is going to be.
We've been taking it day by day since October 7th, 2023.
It's really true.
Really have.
And I think if you just stop to think about it, sometimes you realize like the actual toll.
Oh, if you stop to think about it, you spiral.
Yeah, exactly. It's we're just going, we're trying every day just to keep going. But something that I kind of want to focus on as well is the fact that like this talk around Bibi like defying Trump, right? He speaks to Trump after Iran initially attacks. Well, there's like so many things going on here. First of all, Israel attacks Lebanon, and we're technically in a ceasefire. Like, what is going on with that? Iran wants to react. Trump is like, once they react, don't do anything. I'm pretty sure that's the timeline, right? Even before
you said technically we're in a ceasefire. It seems Israel and the whole Middle East, everyone is living in this world of the technicalities. Our ceasefire with Lebanon includes, like, it is very clear that we are allowed to continue striking Hezbollah when they operate in an area, when they are actively working to harm civilians, which would also mean launchers in a place like Beirut or something that would be pointed towards Israeli civilians, or leadership from Hezbollah or the IRGC, which is what the Beirut strikes were about, being located in Beirut, technically makes it fair game. However, when you think about it in a broader sense, obviously the world looks and goes, you broke the ceasefire, what are you doing? But
wonder if there's ways for those technicalities to be more like clear, because
if there was
not
like a properly drafted ceasefire or something.
But that's the thing. I feel like even when the ceasefire was happening, it was so confusing about who agreed on what. Two different people, like two different parties were saying they agreed on two different deals, and they were like, yes, we have a ceasefire. The terms were different. So that in itself, completely crazy. But when you think about then Trump speaking to Bibi and saying, hey, he basically did the Biden don't, but just like in
the
different
wrong
words.
direction.
Yeah, like that I think would scare any leader. And I think Bibi kind of...
Yeah, but there's also the fact that there's a difference between Trump and Netanyahu. One of the big things is, first of all, I know obviously Iran, Hezbollah, these are big threats that threaten the world at large. But in the moment, Trump has significantly less of a stake. Trump wants to be the hero, of course, but his people, his constituents, the people he needs to protect, are safe from this threat at the moment. Whereas Netanyahu does have a much more vested stake, not just in his people. He also has to live here, When bombs come, he also has to go to the shelters just like everybody else. So there is that factor in they obviously have different priorities. And then there's also the wording around Netanyahu defying Trump. Look, we have a set chain of command. We have, the IDF, it has to follow what the Ramatkal says, and he has to follow what the defense minister says, who listens to the prime minister. But there's also the issue that Netanyahu definitely wants to make it clear that he does not have to then listen to the president of the United States, especially given that we're now officially, we're within an election cycle, and obviously Likud has primaries coming up, and then after that will be general elections. He needs the country to know that he won't just, jump because some guy in a big White House told him to.
Right. I think if he wouldn't have acted at all, and there are criticisms that, he didn't act enough, but the fact that he acted was something. If he wouldn't have acted at all, I think it would have been incredibly destructive to his campaign and to so many other things and the criticism of him. But it's also interesting to see, okay, Trump told Bibi not to do it. He did it. What is the repercussion really? How much is it? And we might still be seeing that, it might still come. But I don't think it will. I think that, especially afterwards, I don't know why Iran did this and what they were thinking.
Lovers fight,
But Iran then shooting, after they kind of had the upper hand for like a second there, where it's like, hey, like you told them not to attack us and they did, and blah blah blah, because they broke this.
And now let us keep the uranium. No, okay.
Why did they then shoot down an American Apache? Like, what would that have, like, how? And I've asked this, sorry, I'm getting just like whatever, I've asked this so many times during this, like, this stage of the war in 2026. Why do they do the things they do? Like, why? There are so many times where, like, if you were a little bit smarter, and I'm happy that they're not, because it's beneficial for my safety, but why?
You know, since this is the all women's episode, I can just
Yes.
say sometimes men are just like that, you know?
It's just like there have been a few times where things have just not made sense to me. And we spoke about it on previous episodes of the deep dive during the war specifically, when it was like, okay, Iran, you're kind of isolated. Now that you know that you're isolated, you're going to just attack loads of places in the Gulf. Like, that never made sense to me. And I know that there were reasons and people talked about the reasons.
Look, yeah, on a very real level, beyond the fact that men do silly things sometimes, you know, can't live with them, can't live without them. But there is the matter of, I mean, there are a few ways to think about it. Right before the last ceasefire, when everyone was sure Iran was on their last leg and they were completely isolated, there's a mindset of, you know, the whole regime being fractured. There was the mindset of, well, if I'm going down, I'm taking you all with me, and just hitting all the buttons and being, you know, when you're in your swan song in your final hour, how much damage can you realistically do before it ends? So there is a thought like that. Now, with the helicopter, it is a matter of, you know, think about it. Have you ever had, if you're ever in a situation where your parent keeps telling you they're going to count to 3, and then it's 1, 2, 2.5. So they know there have been a few of their, you know, their regime are being martyred, but on a grander scheme, they're still in power.
Right, they haven't been destroyed.
They're still executing protesters or anyone who they say worked with Israel and stuff. They're still doing kind of what they've been doing the whole time, just with different people. That there's always a matter of how much can I toe the line? Can I down a helicopter? No people were killed, so it's fine, right? It's a matter of just, like, bending the rules just a little bit more to see, because then what he's gonna say 2 5/8, you know, and then it's not that big a deal.
When does it get to the point where it gets to 3?
That's not for me to decide.
When does it actually get to 3 though? What happens when it gets to 3?
That's not for us to decide. That's up to the guy in the White House, you know?
I was going to say, you know, dare I say it, and I don't want to say it, but I also think that, like, we have to analyze it in a way that is fair. I think at certain points, and I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but Iran hasn't left this conflict as battered and bruised as it was said they would.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, there's been lots of destruction to infrastructure.
Of course.
Their chain of command has been kind of obliterated in many ways. I'm not saying that hasn't happened, but they have taken on the big guys, and they're still there.
Yeah, and no matter how many times Netanyahu and Trump tell us how weak Iran is, if I'm still being woken up to go to my shelter, or more importantly, we live in Jerusalem. We're very fortunate that it's been relatively calm. If the people in the north are still waking up like multiple times a night, if they can't get back to their lives, if schools have to be canceled, and it's great that we've pushed Hezbollah back so much that we can afford our northern residents to have a 15-second warning to get to shelters. That will absolutely save lives.
Which is also such a short amount of time.
Yes.
It's a luxury, and then it's also crazy that we even see it that way.
Yeah, 15 seconds can for some people not be enough time to process what is happening, especially if you have to wrangle kids or animals.
You're waking up in the middle of the night.
But like we've pushed them back, and that's great. Past the Litani, we're marching towards Beirut, whatever the heck is going on there. As long as we're still, you know, dealing with the day-to-day threat, and I say we because if that's the point, the state of Israel, we are just one big people, so if some of us are suffering, then all of us are. If it was in the south or in the north, it doesn't matter. We all need to be as concerned for them as if it were happening here. And with those Hezbollah sending out those fiber-optic drones, are now killing soldiers in this so-called ceasefire. We've had nearly 20 soldiers killed from this. Like, the threat is still there. So no matter how many times that our leaders try to convince me that everyone's very weak and we've almost got them, it's getting harder and harder to believe them.
It's very true, and something that I feel like it's just so important because we can forget about it in like the day-to-day of just everything going on. Since COVID, and I'm thinking about specifically, let's say like younger Israeli kids, since COVID up until literally today, it has not been normal for people.
Those kids,
they haven't had routine,
had a consistent school schedule. I mean, and then we have in our government, the solution was to cut back on material rather than help kids catch up to where they should be at this stage in their lives. I have a brother who's in 11th grade, and he's a bright kid. He's doing great, but I don't know if he ever solidly went to middle or high school.
Right, and it's something that I think regardless of like where people sit politically and what their views are, if you look about like the average innocent citizen, that impacts so many people's lives based on the decisions of other people. They are trying to live their life in the place that they were born. And it's just crazy to think about because that's basically 7 years. And it's not just, it's from wherever, let's say somebody started, as young as possible during that time. Even somebody who, was 17, 18 as COVID was beginning, their entire like adult developmental time has been clouded by war, basically. I think as well, we can't ignore Israel's like deeper fear that Trump may turn his back on us. And like, it sounds very dramatic.
It's very,
but it's a concern.
That, because we have this whole, our prime minister, we have this fear that because our prime minister, president says jump and he says how high, that, we can't, it gives the appearance to some that we can't, are we capable of doing this on our own? Could, like, Netanyahu is not projecting the image that he could stand on his own.
Maybe this week that's what he was trying to do, like he was told no. Or, what's interesting as well, though, I'm not convinced that, and this is genuinely from my own opinion, allegedly, I'm just not convinced that the whole thing was like planned before, and Trump has to say no publicly, and he knew what was going to happen. Like, there is no way for us to know this.
I love plotting in my head as a kind of a way to protect yourself, to be like, no, this is all some big game of 4D chess and I'm too small to understand it, but
and everything's gonna work out.
You must trust that the leaders have a plan. However, again, as time goes on, it's really hard to delude yourself into thinking there's like a method behind the madness.
That is so like accurate. I feel like I go between the two all the time, where I'm like, no, there's definitely, everybody knows what's going on. And then you hear a story, yeah. And then you hear like, even what we were saying about the conflicting reports, or maybe that, and then I'm like, maybe that's like so that we're confused on purpose.
And
maybe,
then, maybe Trump and Netanyahu staged a screaming fight.
Maybe
3 times.
Honestly, it is so hard to know. I do hope that,
New
there is
conspiracy just dropped.
Yeah, oh my gosh.
It's actually all, it's all being handled,
If we go, I guess, also to like, we're kind of talking about all of these things that are happening. In tandem with that, we have reports saying that, there's going to be a deal on the table, and like a deal is coming, and maybe there'll be a nuclear deal. It feels so like,
now
there's so much discourse there.
The problem is what some of the among what we've heard, among what we've heard, the New York Times actually recently reported that before all of the nonsense of this week, let's call it, started, the U.S. and Iran were actually making some real progress, and U.S. officials told the Times that they were confident they could get a 15-year halt on uranium enrichment, which would be, I mean, while it's not ideal, no, you don't get to be rich, pretty, and healthy, I think
how can that be guaranteed? Like,
we're coming up on 3 years of October 7th. I think it's time that we all accept that you're not always going to get everything you want, but what you can do is buy time. And 15 years is a heck of a lot of time.
How do they know that they will remain in check, though? Like, what is stopping them from enriching?
The deal included, from the report, the deal included that they would be overseen by the IAEA, but they are going to be overseen by an international body to ensure that they stay committed to the deal. Would be in the proposal. Now, Trump wants no less than 20. Iranians were willing to give 10. The U.S. is now confident they can settle for 15, per the report.
This is pre everything that happened this week, right?
So the report came out after the fact, talking about things that were going on last week. However, nobody really knows where we stand now because of all the back and forth, the Israel, Lebanon, Iran, all of that fun stuff. We don't know, and it's upsetting that we have to say this every episode. Every parent has to explain it to their children, but we don't know what's going on, and it's becoming more and more apparent that the leaders also don't know what is going on or what could happen, what is the best and worst case scenarios. Like, we just have to accept that maybe we have no idea right now.
I have a quote from JD Vance to CBS News that was this week where he said, "I feel that we're in a position to get a deal that is good for the US economically and that really does deal with the Iranian nuclear program, not just now, not just while Donald Trump is president, but for the long term, to where my kids can say when they're adults, Iran is not going to have a nuclear weapon. That's the goal, and I think we're very close." And that is after the fact.
It goes back to what I mentioned before about how the Israel and the U.S., everyone really has their different priorities, because you will notice there is one specific word missing from Mr. Vance's quote.
Which is?
Israel. It's not, this is obviously, these are questions that were asked by reporters and whatever, but that's not at the forefront of their minds, and that's...
Which makes sense.
It absolutely makes sense. It's still important for us to remember, because at the end of the day, yes, Vance's job is to look into a deal that would be
beneficial for the U.S.
serve the U.S.'s economic interests and would help out his kids in the long run. He's doing exactly what he should be doing. Meanwhile, we have our prime minister talking about how we're gonna make a deal that's great for the U.S. and Israel. But I don't need the prime minister of Israel to care how this deal will benefit people who aren't his. You know?
But then it's complicated
nice.
In the sense of where we get support and what we do that it kind of also does matter.
It's absolutely very nice to care for your neighbors and to want a deal that benefits everyone, but it's great to want a deal that will benefit everyone, but we don't need a deal that benefits everyone. We need a deal that ends the threat to us.
But realistically, though, we might need one that's good for everyone in order to get the right people on our side for us to get the goals that we need. So it never ends in the sense of...
Could go round and round. What's more important, whatever it is, it's always important for them to remember, if it's not, what we want, what we need, it's always more important to remember that they don't need to care what happens to a measly 8 billion people.
Right, I feel like we are, in a lot of senses...
I said 8 billion people. That's very wrong.
Yeah.
Trump doesn't care what happens to 8 billion people.
I think also, how it stands from a geopolitical standpoint is that even if, people can say Israel has many, many strengths, and it does, we are still the little man when it comes to what America is as a global superpower.
We're the sheep
and
with
what
our
Israel
70
is.
wolf neighbors. Everybody knows this. We are the underdog to end them all.
And obviously Israel is not sort of super happy about this deal. Like, the IDF chief of staff told the security cabinet that the military believes almost any deal with Iran would be a bad one.
Of course.
So again, talking about priorities, and the US is looking for something where they can say, we did this and it has been fixed. Israel is looking... I don't know if it's more just for I don't actually know what Israel's looking for.
I don't know. Yeah, nobody really knows. I mean, I know what some people are looking for. There is, of course, the Smotrich approach, which is, of course, for every missile launched, we knock down 20 to 30 buildings in Beirut. It doesn't matter which. He did not specify if they need to be military infrastructure or just civilian buildings.
This podcast does not support
that.
Yeah.
So, there is that approach, but I think it's very, very sad to say, but Trump wants peace in the Middle East. And I think Middle Eastern leaders are realizing that that may not be a possibility with both sides still standing. Trump is has been for a while. Trump, for a while now, has been sort of toying with the idea with little comments that the war could end and there would be peace, but the IRGC could stay in place. He infamously told reporters that he successfully completed regime change because he killed all the current members and they were quickly replaced with new members. But the IRGC is still there.
Right.
Obviously, that's the one point where, Trump and Vance are talking about the nuclear issue. They want peace in the Middle East. We just want to still be standing at the end of it. So these are very different goals. We're still going hard for regime change. We want the IRGC eliminated. And that's not been a projected priority for Trump for a while now. And that is the main issue where, on most things we are aligned. We don't want them to have nuclear weaponry and stuff. We want them to stop launching missiles at everyone around them. We want them to stop killing protesters, but there's not much we can do about that, unfortunately. But that is the big point right now of, do you think, Trump isn't even really fighting for that regime change anymore?
Well, it sounds like, from his own words, that he
did
already
it.
believes that it happened. I think it brings us back to kind of and we come back to this a lot, but, we're in this post-October 7th world where I think everything for Israelis, and I'll speak for myself specifically, the curtain has been lifted. Your eyes are open and you realize that, you really can't make all the goals. You can't get everything you want. All of the things that you might say, this will be the best thing in order for my country and people to have security, you're lucky if you get a few of those things. And I think we need to be realistic, because how much longer can it last? But then also, maybe persistence is the key. So it's also, again, it's so many questions that we don't have answers to, and the answers give us more questions. So it's not really clear, what, and again, it's kind of been like that for the last, it's been like that for the last few years, but the last 6 months specifically have been very much a question mark. The last 6 months specifically have been a really big question mark. And again, we always say, we have to just keep going. We have to just keep calm and carry on. But
And, this week raised even more questions of the whole, is this what life is going to be? Are we just going to just be the punching bag at the whim as the U.S. and Iran battle it out in the Hormuz, and then whenever the U.S. does something to upset Iran, they just launch missiles at countries that are not the United States, and then we get sucked back in, and then we get out. I think there's, pretty interesting that sometimes the U.S. does carry out strikes against Iran, and that doesn't end in retaliation against Israel, which is, interesting. I did not think.
Sometimes it does.
Sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. So you never get to know, which means we now get to be, you're always going to be hyper aware of what these two other countries are doing somewhere very far from you, because it could have impact on you, even though we weren't involved. We didn't send that helicopter. We weren't part of that in any situation. We didn't, to my knowledge, to the general public's knowledge, we didn't necessarily assist the U.S. in strikes as retaliation for the Apache. And then when Iran decides to strike everyone back, so why, that's not our circus. Why are you making it our monkeys?
But I think now it's also intertwined that
it is.
There's not much you can do.
We're at the point, and we've been great allies for decades, that unfortunately Iran knows they could not launch an attack on U.S. soil and come out of it alive. But again, because it is the nature of things that I will care about your things less than I care about mine, that the U.S. will respond not more kindly, but less harshly to an attack on Israeli soil.
As we start to wrap up, I know that we can't really predict the future, but what do you foresee the next week looking like? Or is it just a big blob of I don't know? Which is also okay.
I hate to say that I'm taking it day by day, because I'm taking it hour by hour, make no mistake. And at our news desk, that really is all you can do. You have to be, we're hoping for the best, but we are very much expecting the worst. And preparing for it as well, which is also equally important,
That's how we save lives, I think.
Absolutely. That's why, like, the early warning system is very important and stuff, because we are prepared for, in a civilian capacity, we are now used to the whole up and down and back and forth, and we learned how to run with very little sleep and things like that. What I'm hoping will happen is this week could potentially, now that things have kind of died down a bit, there could potentially be talks about, we could gear up for another round of talks in Pakistan with Iran and the US. Now that everyone's kind of had their fun, we can all settle down. In a perfect world, I would love an Israeli representative in that room too, but if it's just got to be the US, then we do unfortunately have to trust that this other entity is keeping our interests at heart, which isn't a very easy thing to put your trust in someone else like that, but it's an unfortunate necessity. I would ideally like to see them going back to that, because that is what Trump has kind of been talking about for a while everyone was still striking each other. He said, I still believe that, we can talk this out. What I'm expecting is unfortunately more of the same, which is there will be these little flare-ups. I don't know if they'll strike here again, because I really don't want them to. So
wishful thinking.
I really don't want them to. I'm going to be very honest. Obviously, it's not fun for anyone, but I'm expecting that we're continuing pushback in the north. Unfortunately, the further north we move, the more likely it is that another Iranian attack will happen here. But there is no reality where we can't keep pushing forward in the north, because we have to be protecting our citizens, come what may.
I try to be very positive, usually, so I feel like coming at this with a kind of negative feeling is like... No, I'm saying I'm surprised that I'm going to come negative right now, but to me, the diplomacy aspect of it, and obviously if things can be solved with diplomacy, that would be great. It doesn't look that way to me, and if so, like, it feels like just putting a cork in a bottle that's about to explode. Yes, maybe it will stop it for a second, but eventually it's going to pop open, and it really does feel like that. I also feel like with all the elements of the war, it feels like, when in a TV show when someone goes in for an investigation kind of room or something, there's red string tied to everything, and you've got Beirut and Iran and everything that's happening in the north, and everything that's happening in Yemen, and everything that's happening in the US and Israel and Hamas, and there's so many elements to it.
Too,
it's
to try and keep
I don't even know.
I think I said I believe that I would love for an Israeli representative in these negotiations, and the more you think about it, the more it makes sense. You mentioned diplomacy is not working out so great, and a big problem is because these are two entities speaking different languages. Essentially, you have a Western country and a Middle Eastern country. And they're being mediated by, according to the JPO style guide, Pakistan is not in the Middle East. But for all intents and purposes, we obviously know the country is more aligned with one than the other, which is why I would actually think that from a strategic standpoint, having a sort of midway point between the Middle East and the West be in the room would be able to serve as some sort of a translation. Basically, what I'm saying is let Israel in on the negotiations, considering we're going to be so affected by this.
And with that, we're going to close up our episode. Thank you so much for joining us and helping kind of sort through all of those red strings.
Even though I'm sure we probably have more questions than we did before, and in an hour from now, we'll have even more.
No pun intended, but we've only scratched the surface on what is going on. But until next time, and let's hope that anything negative is totally wrong and we're all going to be fine, but we also need to be prepared. Thank you. That's it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for watching, and we are hoping that by next week everything will quieten down. But in the meantime, if you want to get the latest news and updates on Israel and the Middle East, head to jpost.com.